everybody, to our first Wife Savers live webinar. You know what? Everybody used to do live webinars, but then everyone started doing recorded everything, right? So I'm like going back to the live webinar because I miss them. I miss them because we're together, we're here, we're together, and we get to really talk and interact. And what can be better than that, especially when you're a woman, than to be with other women talking about such important things, such beautiful things that we don't really talk about otherwise. So this is the place. This is the place to be. And we're just excited for ourselves and excited for you and excited to be with you live. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be really, really fun. And I'm excited to introduce my guest to you, but I'm going to do that in a second after I turn the time over to Emily, who is a member of my team, Team Wife for Life and Team Wife Savers. She's done both. And she is going to kind of get us all on the same page so this all goes very smoothly. All right? It's all yours, Emily.
Thank you, Ramona. Welcome to women all over the world with us today. I'm fairly sure we had like over 100 registrations for this webinar. So we are just honored and grateful for your presence and your support today. And we're very excited to be here with Ramona and our special guest, Emma Bell, that I'm really looking forward to hearing from today. We recognize that we have many Wife Saver students with us and friends who have been with us for a while. And we also welcome all of those who have joined us that are Emma's friends and others, just friends of our friends who have heard and come today and joined us. We're so glad that you're all here. This webinar, for your information, some of you have asked, will this webinar be recorded? It will. It will be recorded. And for those of you who are our premium Wife Savers members, it will be available in our replay section eventually. So this will be something you can listen to again and again if you're one of our Wife Savers premium members. And if you're interested in more information about our amazing Wife Savers education program, please go to wifesavers.org. For those of you who have joined us in Wife Savers, this environment will be very familiar to you. Our Zoom room is what we use for our live labs, our kitchen table conversations, and other support features we have as part of our premium membership. So this is going to function very much like that today, except that we're going to do things a little differently with the chat. And for those of you who are new today, we really need to help you understand what this is going to look like. So if you don't mind, I'll just briefly explain how this is going to work. We love being live with you. That's a really special experience. Like Ramona said, a lot of people aren't doing as many live meetings anymore, and that's an awesome thing. We love that we have some interactive features today, like a chat box and a Q&A box, and I'll explain how we'd like you to use them. The chat box can be used for your comments, questions. If you're new, you can see already on the side it's going. Everyone's saying it's lovely to be here. Best girlfriend meeting. This is awesome. So we've got our chat box alive and well. But today, out of respect to our presenter, Emma, we would ask that you treat this as a lecture format and that you really absorb and be present with Emma and focus on what she has to share and not be in the chat. Unless you have a technical question or another issue that's preventing you from hearing or seeing or something, we can try to assist you. If you'll just select all panelists in the drop-down menu, that will allow just our staff and team members to see your comments during the webinar. At the conclusion of the webinar, Ramona promises to open it up and allow you all to chat with each other and with us for a little bit. So for those of you who have questions that come up during the webinar that you'd really like our presenters to answer, we'll have you use our Q&A box. That's at the bottom. And you can type your question. It'll go directly to me and our other team members that are here supporting today. We will either answer you just on the spot directly, or we'll save your question for the presenters at the end as time allows. So please just use the Q&A box today. We'll give all our time and attention to Emma, and we'll save the chat for the end. Now, for those of you who can stay with us through the entire webinar today, not only are you going to get some amazing content and tips and information, but we're also going to have a giveaway. Ramona has generously offered to do her own special giveaway, and Emma has something she'll be offering as well. So I believe Emma will have something for all of you who stay till the end, and Ramona will be doing a drawing. So please stay with us if you can. It will be worth it. And with that, Ramona, back to you.
Yay! That was well done, Emily. I put you in charge of that every time.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope I can keep this Emily and Emma straight. All right.
Yeah.
So, Emily, I'm going to ask you to mute yourself, turn off your camera, and we'll thank you. But I want you to stay available, right? Because
I will be behind the scenes answering your questions. So
that makes us all feel better. And so we're going to go to Emma then now and start to learn a lot for ourselves, but that's going to start with learning about her. Emma and I met, how many years ago is it now? Maybe 4 years, 5?
Yeah, I think it's probably, certainly 4, but probably 5, because time goes faster than we all imagine.
Luckily, we were thrown into the same small group discussion at a bigger conference kind of thing, and we really hit it off. She and her husband Isabel, I think he kind of fell in love with me, and I kind of fell in love with him because he's just so cool. Yeah, he's an amazing man, and we all got to be good friends. So Emma lives in Scotland, which is very exotic to us here in the United States. We all can't wait to listen to your beautiful voice. And but from her home, she has had an impact on, countless men and women all over the world in her work. And yes, from her home base, but she's also traveled all over the world to not only teach and help and coach and inspire people, but to learn from them. It's amazing to me what she did. We're talking 35,000 miles of travel to actually sit one-on-one with people who had survived serious trauma. I mean, wait till you hear some of these stories. And the lessons that she learned on our behalf that she can now share with us from those interviews, from the real experiences of real people. So that underlies everything she does and everything she talks about. We're going to hear a lot about that. And it spawned the Global Resilience Project that she founded. So, Emma, where shall we begin? Tell us from your point of view a little bit more about that experience that I referred to.
This life-changing experience. So I guess the logical place to start, hello everyone, it's lovely to join you and talk about this project that I'm so passionate about, this journey that has changed my life. And I think the best place to start is to answer the question, why on earth did I give up my role as a judge? And
you had a really
I know.
important career, and you were at the top.
I was at the top of my career. And I said to my lovely husband, I was really sort of obsessed with this idea of why it is that some people can thrive in the face of challenge and adversity, and yet other people don't thrive. They fall apart. And I had seen in my own life and growing up in my own family, we'd faced lots of difficulties. I'm sure many of the people who are joining us in this webinar have. And I just saw different members of my family responding in different ways. Some were thriving and some were not thriving. They were barely surviving. But the interesting thing is that I looked like I was surviving from the outside. Sorry, I was thriving from the outside. You know, I looked like I had it all. I was a partner in a big corporate law firm. I had the house, the car, the marriage. And honestly, I wasn't thriving at all. I was doing what I ought to have done. I was doing what society tells us to do. I'd worked hard. I was playing by all the rules. I had the success and the trappings, and I felt anxious and unhappy and kept asking the question, there must be more to life than this. Yeah. And it was that, and also, you know, as a litigator, Ramona, acting for clients who were going to allow, I could see they were going to allow the tragedy that had happened to define the rest of their life. And yet other clients had already overcome the tragedy. They were already thriving. They were ready to grow from what had happened to them. And then also, you know, as a judge, you see people come before you and you can tell that some people are going to thrive. They already are thriving. They're not going to allow that event or challenge to define them, while others are barely surviving.
I'm really looking forward to understanding more what thriving looks like.
Yeah, so I was really keen to do that. I mean, so the question kept coming up for me, and for me, what thriving meant was that you had grown as a result of any challenge.
You had grown,
yeah, so that you were better than before. One of our thrivers, the wonderful Karen Sullivan, she defined it as being better than before. You know, that when an event, I mean, it might be an argument with your husband, it might be losing your job. In the case of the thrivers, it was having children who'd committed suicide. It was losing loved ones in terrorist attacks. It was gang rapes. And whether it's a smaller challenge or a huge trauma, people who thrive are better than before. They've grown as a result of the trauma. They've consolidated all of the pain to be a kinder, better, more loving and giving and more compassionate person with themselves and with other people. So thriving for me does mean that you're better as a result of the experience. Whereas surviving means that you're still here, but you're carrying the pain. You're bitter rather than better. If you understand that distinction. So we were really clear. We had a team on this project, and one of them was a very eminent psychologist called Paul Hannam, who is a resilience expert, and he worked with me to define thriving, to define surviving, to understand the distinction between the two, so that we made sure we were talking to people who'd been through trauma and who were truly, truly thriving.
Wow.
And
already we've only started, and already this is so profound to me, because, you know, we all talk about thriving or surviving. It's nice how they kind of rhyme, those two, because they're such perfect juxtaposition. But I have not honestly ever really put my head into the idea of what does it mean to thrive, and how can I tell if I'm thriving? How can I see if others are thriving, and more importantly, that they're not, and that maybe there's something I can do for them because I know the signs or whatever. And then what would I offer them even then? So it's so applicable, not just to us, but in all our relationships with the people we care about. Yes.
Absolutely. And the thing to understand is that thriving is not a continuous state. It's not like a destination we arrive at and therefore we're here and we're always going to thrive. Thriving and surviving is a moment-to-moment existence. You know, so we could be thriving over breakfast, and then by 10:05, we're barely surviving, you know, because the kids have had an argument, or they're late for school, or we've got an email in that's really upset us, and then we tip off thriving into surviving. And so the thing is to recognize when we're in surviving and when we're in thriving. And whenever we're in surviving, it's knowing that we feel less than. We feel angry or frustrated or irritated or down on ourselves or anxious or stressed. These are all surviving states. So we're still here, but we're less than our true potential in that conversation. And it's recognizing when you're just surviving and doing something deliberate to shift from surviving to thriving. So I talk about being able to choose thriving over surviving. But in order to be able to choose, you need to realize that you're in a surviving state. You've slipped into a surviving state and you want to shift into a thriving state. And that means you need to choose, usually to do something or to think a particular way. And that's what I was in search of, because when I knew I wasn't thriving, I had moments where I glimpsed the possibility, but generally I was just surviving. Clients mainly were just surviving, and yet those who were thriving would be shining. When I was a coach, those who were thriving, they were shining beacons of inspiration. And I went in search of any research that I could find that told me what the strategies were to make that shift from surviving to thriving. Now, I could find lots of research that talked about those who had faced terminal illnesses, what they did to thrive, or those who'd been through divorce, what they did to thrive. But nobody, so far as I could tell, had looked at lots and lots of different kinds of trauma and challenges.
Oh, okay.
And whether those who had thrived in the face of radically different trauma, challenges, adversity, whether they were using identical resilience strategies to thrive. Because if we could find that out, then you and I and everyone here, we would be able to know that whatever we were facing, if we just did this or took this approach, then we would be able to shift from surviving to thriving. But no one had done that research. And, I was saying to my husband that this is important. This is my purpose. This would really help with those people that I coach. This would really help with the people that I talk to. And this would be life-changing for me too. And he was really supportive when I said, honey, I need to give up my final salary pension scheme and my judicial career to go on this journey around the world.
Oh, the one.
These 50 drivers.
Okay, can we just take a minute here, just a breath, to pay tribute to your husband?
He's amazing. And actually, Ramona, you met him before you met me, because he was the one that connected with you and made the introduction. He's amazing. And not only did he support my decision, he came with me on the journey. He brought his camera equipment and we filmed the interviews. And I'm so glad he did, because I'm not the same person I before I went on this journey. I have changed. And he changed too.
He felt the change too. It was something you shared. I love that part. My work is with women and their marriages. Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about their husband, right? And the more advanced we become in my strategies and my skill sets that I teach, we learn about dream weaving, and dream seeking, keeping, believing, and weaving. And when a couple achieves that level of partnership, we have a marriage that can change the world. And you are a perfect example of that. And this story is such a beautiful illustration of what can happen. What can happen. So, all right, I just had to take a little pause there to underline for my students what we're hearing, what we're seeing here. So we have several subjects that I know my students are keenly interested in that I want to talk about and get to. And I hope then that we're going to learn a little from you about some of these resilient strategies that you found were actually being employed throughout all of these thrivers that you were getting to know so personally, know their stories, and you're saying, hey, that's the same as this.
Exactly.
Even though their traumas, their stories were so different.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I had to approach it obviously with the mindset of there might not be common resilience strategies across all of these thrivers, and I had to listen and listen to their stories. And what the thrivers were doing, in fact, was not saying that they had gone through the trauma and then set out thinking, if I do A, B, and C, I'll be fine. What they were doing was casting their mind back to the journey from just surviving the trauma all the way through to the point of thriving relatively consistently, and saying to me, well, actually, these are the things, with the benefit of hindsight, that enabled me to thrive. And it was when they identified these things, and obviously as a researcher, I was looking at what was common across everything that the thrivers had said. And I saw very, very clearly that there were 9 secrets to thriving, as we call them. There are 9 things that you and I and everyone here can do to thrive every single day.
It strikes me, Emma, that you're interviewing these people. You said they had to cast their minds back. They had to remember. And it might have been I'm sure it was actual benefit to them to be able to articulate these things and to have the world care and to help themselves frame their experience and to think of themselves as a thriver. I think, it's just a win-win for them. Sharing their stories with us was good for them, I'm sure. And how good is it for us? I'm so excited to hear more. Did you find or to what degree, or how did these thrivers put themselves, how did they heal? Was it by forgetting themselves, or was it by prioritizing themselves? How does self-care, if you will, play into becoming a thriver? Did you?
Well, self-care is the first of the 9 secrets to thriving, because
it's number one.
It's number one. It's number one. And so I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, but I had always had this sense that, what is self-care anyway? You know, is it going to the gym? Is it eating good food? What does that actually mean? So first of all, let's just nail that. Self-care means that it's an attitude of mind. It means I matter. It doesn't mean I matter when everyone else has been looked after. It means I matter. And so it's an attitude of mind. And it's not just about going to the gym and eating well. It's this deliberate intention to care for your emotional, mental, and physical well-being. So it's having that deliberate intention in everything that you do to look after these aspects of ourselves. So it's not just going for a run 3 times a week, because that's all. It's something we do 24 hours a day.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you know.
Wow, what a mind shift. Yeah, it's a 24/7. It's deep inside. It's a belief that I matter. I'm just thinking, working with as many women as I do, is it a detriment to add because to the end of that? I matter because? Like, I matter because I'm a wife, or I matter because I'm a mother. And if you take away those things, I don't matter anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I think the sentence is complete with I matter, full stop. Because if you qualify it by adding a role onto the end of it, then what happens when or if that role is taken away? And what are you saying about the people who aren't fulfilling that role? The truth is we all matter. But the thing about self-care is I have to understand that I matter. Now, when I'm in a relationship with you and I care about you, I already know that you matter when I care about you, and I treat you as if you matter. But what we don't do consciously is care for ourselves, because when we care for ourselves, we are accepting that we matter. So when I'm in relationship, I'm in this conversation with you. And what I mean by self-care is something that operates 24 hours a day is, as I'm in this conversation with you, I'm very aware that I matter, and I'm very aware that you matter. I'm aware that we both matter. So there's a lovely balance to the interaction. You know, I don't matter more than you, and equally you don't matter more than me. We all matter. And when we treat other people that we're in relationship with as if they matter more, then lots of things happen. We can lose ourselves in that relationship. We start to unconsciously look to them to fulfill our needs and make us feel good about ourselves. And that's not their job. That's our job. We also start to teach our children unconscious patterns, either that they matter more than other people, or they matter more than us, or they matter less than us. So this is really great role modeling for our children.
Oh, yes. What a gift. What a gift to your children. We talk a lot about respect in Wife Savers. And that's what this is basically. But I love the idea that I matter is such a core belief that it impacts the relationships, like you say, the gift that you're giving to your children or to your husband, because we're so afraid that we're taking away from the relationship by spending any energy on ourselves, any energy, any time, any money, any resources. We're taking away from relationships. But you're telling us if we don't believe I matter and treat ourselves like I matter, we're actually risking the relationship.
Exactly. And, you know, that sounds counterintuitive initially. It really does. Well, you know, if I'm behaving like I matter, then somehow I'm taking something away from you. But in fact, it's completely the reverse of that. When I know I matter, and from that, we'll hear some of the stories of the thrivers, because what I matter means, and I accept myself, even though I've got lots of flaws and lots of faults, but I accept myself, and even to the point where I love myself. When you complete that whole self-care cycle, then actually you're not looking to make up a deficit. You're not looking for someone else to complete you. And there's no resentment in relationships, because you're taking care of your own needs. You're asking for what you need. You're not expecting your partner to read your mind or your children to have done something. You take responsibility for asking for what you need, for setting your boundaries, for making yourself happy, because I matter, just as you matter. You know, it's the one, if there's just one thing to take away from this webinar, it would be self-caring is an attitude of mind.
Wow.
I matter, and it applies 24 hours a day, and it'll be the one thing that truly transforms your relationship with yourself and also with those you care about.
So self-care then is, what's the right way to say it? It's interwoven somehow with self-acceptance.
Yeah, self-care is almost like the umbrella, and what sits under it are a whole load of practices that we heard from the various drivers, and I'll share some of their stories with you. So what we heard, for example, I mean, there was this wonderful thriver called Davidson, and she was cutting drugs for her father when she was 6 years old. Her father was a drug dealer. She became a carer for her mother when she was 8 years old. Her mother kept threatening suicide, and she therefore felt it was her job to keep her mother alive. She would have to go to the welfare office to get the money for the family so her father wouldn't spend it on drugs. Violence was an everyday occurrence. She saw her father attempt to murder her mother. at the age of 12, her father started to sexually abuse her, and she was taken into care for a short time. And then her mum said, well, I'm well enough to take her back. But that very night she went back home. Her mother let her father back into the house again. So all we had known was that she didn't matter. All we had known was that her mother didn't matter. She hadn't, this idea of self-care was not something that existed in our world. And the very first time that she even had a sense that she was in some way acceptable, in some way lovable, was when she was taken into care by a foster family who really, really loved her. So she was 16, and they were doing things for her that showed that they loved her. And somehow, despite everything she'd been through, she understood that if they loved her, she must be lovable. Wow. But what she did was she took a very, she thought, well, how do I move to accepting myself, to knowing that I am worthy, that I matter? And so she didn't read a mindfulness book or anything like that. She just instinctively started to do things that made her happy. So go for a walk in nature. Exactly. It sounds almost too simple, but instinctively she thought, well, I love walking in nature, so I'm going to go for a walk in nature. And she did crafts. So she would absorb herself in doing crafts because that made her happy. So she very deliberately would do things that made her happy. And what she was unconsciously telling herself was, I'm worthy. If I'm doing things to make myself happy, then I must be worthy. And she could see she had flaws and faults. We all have flaws and faults. None of us are perfect. Hallelujah.
Yes.
But just to accept herself.
Wow.
And it was only by giving to herself time, attention, good experiences that she was able to really accept herself. But I would say that what I've heard from the thrivers is self-acceptance is actually a choice. It's a choice about whether you continue in the voice in your head, whether you continue putting yourself down, or whether you just decide one day that you're not going to do that anymore, that you're going to be more compassionate with yourself, that you're going to talk to yourself as if you were your own best friend. Now, I heard that from countless thrivers. One man, Eric Hodgson from upstate Boston, he had a wonderful daughter called Zoe. Now, Zoe is the Greek term for life. And when Zoe was born, he held her in his arms and he promised her that he was going to take care of her. And by the time Zoe was 15, he and Zoe's mum were locked in a custody battle. And Zoe was staying at a halfway house, and she popped over to see Eric, and they made kale chips together, and they were clearing up the kitchen. And Zoe said, I'm going up to listen to some music. And so Eric just said, I love you, pumpkins. And she shouted down the stairs, I love you too, Dad. And she went into her bedroom. And I've had the privilege of being in Zoe's bedroom. It's beautiful, the strings of lights. And Eric went up to say goodnight to her, and he thought she was in the wardrobe and was going to jump out and surprise him. But she wasn't. She had taken her own life. And he spent the whole year after that just devastating event beating himself up.
Yes.
Screaming at himself in the car on the way home from work, crying for her forgiveness. And then one day on the journey home, he heard or felt a sense of, this is not right. Zoe would not be wanting me to do this. If it were me who'd taken my life and Zoe was grieving me, I wouldn't want her to be beating herself up for this. And he talked to Graham and I a lot about the importance of self-compassion, the importance of just choosing how you talk to yourself, of making yourself your own best friend, of talking lovingly to yourself, talking to yourself like you talk to your oldest child, when they're struggling with something. That is a choice. And we heard that time and again from the thrivers.
Wow.
So that's a big part of self-care.
Wow. That's interesting. That you shared that story. I was on the tip of my tongue to say, but what about self-acceptance being, how does that work when you've done something that you feel has hurt others? How do you get to this place of self-acceptance? Obviously, you have to go through self-forgiveness. Is that part of it too? That's part of the self-compassion?
So this was a process I talked a lot to the thrivers about, that when you have hurt someone, and the first thing to do is accept the situation. Until you accept the situation, you can't accept yourself or what you've done. So accept that you said those things, accept that you did those things, accept that your words and what you did hurt someone else. And that will bring up grief, it will bring up sorrow, it will bring up pain. And it's really important that you feel those feelings of pain. Because what a lot of us do is we push them away, or we avoid thinking about them, or we go and eat something, or we put the TV on, or we listen to music. And Kia Sher, who I do want to talk about, she was really clear about, if you don't sit and feel the pain and let it pass through, then you actually prevent yourself from feeling joy and happiness fully too. But you teach your emotions how to feel. So the first thing is accept that this has happened and feel the pain that goes with it. That will eventually ebb away. And what will replace that is, what would I do differently next time? What have I learned from this about myself? What have I learned from this about the other person and where their triggers are? And what do I promise I'll do for myself and for them next time? There's a lovely line in the book by Neil Donald Walsh called Conversations with God, which is, the gift in every interaction is only ever for you. And the gift is the same thing every single time, and it's to grow. So when we do something we wish we hadn't, there's a gift in that, and the gift is to grow, to be better than before. Remember, we were talking about thriving? So thriving is about better than before.
Whether positive or negative, we can grow from.
Yeah. And if we're going to thrive from a situation like that, if we're going to be better than before, we need to feel the pain, accept it happened, learn from it, and then do what you described, Ramona, and that is forgive ourselves. Just as we would encourage our friend to forgive themselves. Because if we don't, we hang on to it. We hang on to the guilt and the grief, and that will infect the relationship. If you want the relationship to rise to the next level, you need to release the guilt and the grief, learn from it, make amends, apologize, do whatever requires to be done, forgive yourself, and be better than you were before.
All right. Okay. This is going to take a while to digest. Even me. I mean, and speaking of forgiveness, you've got to forgive me for just a minute while I close the windows in my office, and I'm going to forgive the airplane that keeps circling over my house.
I couldn't hear it.
Well, we get a.
While Ramona's doing that, hey Emma, may I ask you again to tell me the name of that gentleman you just quoted when you said the gift of every interaction is to grow? Who was that again?
Yeah. So his name, he's a wonderful writer. His name is Neil Donald Walsh. So it's Neale, Donald, good Scottish name there, Walsh, Walsch. And he wrote a book many years ago called Conversations with God. And that's, one in book number one, that's I love book number one, and there's a lot that resonates with me. But that idea of growing was something we heard time and again from our thrivers. And Kia Sher, whom I mentioned, sorry, Emily, I'll stop there. Is that, hopefully that's okay for you and anyone here who wants to pick
Thank
that up.
you. I was grateful for the chance to interrupt really quickly because I really wanted to make sure I had that correct. That quote resonates with me so much, and I want to have that and get it right.
So,
can I?
Yes, please.
I mentioned Kia share, and I do want to share her story because it's profoundly moving, and I learned so much from her about what self-caring really means and how it supports the love in our relationships. So Kia was married to Alan. She had a 13-year-old daughter called Naomi, and Kia was staying in Florida to look after her mum, to care for her mum, while Alan and Naomi went off on a meditation retreat in Mumbai. And it was a Wednesday, and she was making tea, and she was about to sit down with her mum and watch Oprah Winfrey on the TV, and the phone went, and it was someone from the meditation retreat who simply said, "Turn on CNN, there are terrorist attacks in Mumbai." And they put the phone down, and Kate said she fell to her knees, and for the next 2 days, she was just watching CNN and these horrific terrorist attacks that were occurring in Mumbai. And she was waiting by the phone, and it was only on Friday morning that she got the call that both Alan and Naomi had been murdered in the restaurant in the Oberoi Hotel. And as I sat and listened to her tell me this, and she's so grateful and so at peace with that trauma. And so we started exploring what were the things that allowed her to, what she would say is relate to Alan and Naomi in a new, more spiritual way. And she talked a lot about self-love, self-care, and this idea of really connecting with your inner self, with the essence of who you are. And that really made sense to me. So rather than being in our head all the time, actually taking space to connect with who you are. And so there was a lovely little exercise that I use a lot that she shared with me, and that is, and everyone can do it now. If you were to take your hand and just put it on your heart and just breathe in and just think the word love. And she calls that taking a balance break. You can do that. A balance break, just to get back into balance. And just breathe in the word love. Breathe in the word love. And that just, a whole lot of things happen. And she shared a lot with me.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm amazed. I hope everyone else just tried that with us, because I feel like a warm blanket just was draped around my shoulders, and I'm breathing more regularly even. That's amazing. Breathe in the word love. Okay, keep going.
Breathe in the word. And well, I really feel that helps us connect with our loving essence, with who we really are. Okay. And that in turn, it's this virtuous cycle. The more things like that we do, the more we know we matter, the more we care for ourselves, the more we accept ourselves, and then eventually the more we love ourselves. So there's the balance break that Kia shared with me. There's the compassionate self-talk that Eric Hodgson talked about. And there are Lee Davidson, who I told you about earlier. She sits with her 4 children, and they do a gratitude and sharing exercise every day, where they just take care of one another by listening really carefully to what the other wants to share about what's been good about their day. What are they really grateful for? What have they done that they're proud of? What have they done that they wish they hadn't done? And how do they feel about that? And how are they going to make amends? And how are they going to forgive themselves? And how have they grown from the experience? And I think we can all, especially with children, teaching them these practices would be so powerful.
Wow. What an advantage for a little person as they become a young adult and they're really going out in the world, to have that practice ingrained in them, that way of reflecting on themselves and on the positive things, and then maybe not such positive things, but how is this going to be different? Or how have I grown for this? Everything we're learning to teach them in a real, consistent, regular, intentional way.
Yeah.
I can't even think of more powerful parenting than that. That's incredible. Wow. But we're talking a lot about self. We've how this is all works together, the self-compassion, the self-love, the self-acceptance, the self-care. It all falls under that umbrella. But how do relationships fit into this? For instance, is it self-care to choose who I associate with or who I spend time with? Is it a form of self-care to establish boundaries with maybe the more toxic relationships in my life? Do you know what I'm saying? Is that under the umbrella of self-care too? Or how does that?
Yes, and yes, with an exclamation mark. So that both, the Thrivers said they identified both those things you've talked about. The Jim Rohn, who some of the people who are joining us might have heard of, he said something that really sticks with me. And it's that we are the sum total of the 5 people we spend most of our time with. And, that really informs our attitude. It informs our zest for life. It informs what we think we're capable of, how loving we are, how patient we are, how compassionate we are, and so on. And so being really careful about who you are spending most of your time with is a decision.
It's important, but you can't avoid being impacted by what others are telling you.
No, exactly. They are your cheerleaders or your doubters. They are your cheerleaders or your chargers. It's really, really important to set those boundaries, what you're talking about. So I remember making this decision very consciously for the first time, that every time I went on a phone call with a particular friend of mine, she would talk about other people, and not in a very supportive or charitable way. And I would always come off that call feeling much worse than I felt before I went on the call. And I decided it wasn't her that was making me feel bad. It was me that kept pushing myself in that position so that I felt that way. And if I wanted to feel empowered, I had to make the decision to move away from that phone call. Now, the way I did it was I just stopped calling her. And, it was a very deliberate decision. It was difficult because it had a ripple effect on our social group. And, I had to deal with all these conditioned feelings of I should call her. I don't want to hurt her feelings. Maybe I should just put up with this. But it was not doing me any good. And actually it wasn't doing her any good, because she wouldn't feel good after the call either. Because when we sit and judge others, we get that momentary sense of inflation because we feel better because we're putting others down. But in the long term, it doesn't make us feel good.
And when we talk with others about it, there's a sense of camaraderie for a moment.
Exactly. So you have to be courageous. Self-care calls for courage. But my courage was to say, I have to set my boundaries. And now I could have said to her, I don't feel comfortable you talking about people. I've done that with other friends of mine and it's worked really well. But with this person, my belief was that would not make a difference. So I had to create a distance. But I take very seriously who I spend most of my time with, because I know that dictates it's self-care, how much I've got to give depends on who I surround myself with.
Wow. I hope everybody listening is writing that down and thinking about it. The 5, how did you put it? The 5 people that you...
The 5 people, yeah. We're the sum total of the 5 people we spend most of our time with.
Wow. And to be really thoughtful about that. I imagine that you were caught up, and I can say I've been in a similar situation, and just sort of, this is my life, this is my routine, this is my friend, this is what we do. And just extract yourself from that, to take a step back, to really be more, I'm going to try and look at this more objectively. I don't feel good. Why don't I feel good? I got to think this through, and then be able to identify, it's after those conversations with that person. And then to have the courage to actually do something about it, and to hold that line, because I matter.
Yeah, exactly, because I matter. And I know that many people will be sitting saying, okay, well, if it's a friend, you might be able to pull away. But what happens if it's your mother-in-law?
Right.
Or what happens if it's your sister? Or what happens if it's someone where the social conditions mean that you need to be with them a lot more? Well, I would encourage you to employ your courage in a different way.
Okay.
And that is to ask for what you need. Gently and from a place of love. And I always talk about I'd like to think of it in terms of a volume switch. You do it in the quietest possible way, first of all. And if they don't hear it, you turn the volume up a bit. And if they still don't hear it, you might have to turn the volume up a bit. Because if you don't do that, then either you'll burst and the volume will be really loud one day and you'll just lose your temper, or you just leak the irritation out.
Leak, yes. That toxic stuff leaks.
It just leaks out of you. It leaks. I can't control my eyebrows, my nostrils, my top lip, but yet when my thinking, what research says is when your thinking is not consistent with what you're saying, if you're saying, I really like you, I think you're really interesting, or, oh, that's wonderful. If your thinking is different from that, then only 7% of the meaning comes from your words. Over 90% comes from your tone of voice and this stuff right here, your body language. And I can't control my top lip or my nostrils, and I am leaking all over the place.
I love that. I'm writing down all these key words that represent volumes. Just a one word, leaking, is always going to mean a great deal now to me. And the idea of volume and being your best friend and all of that. I get a lot of those kind of questions myself in my work about those kind of relationships that are not good for you, or that you're really, really struggling with. And actually, I've addressed a number of them in our Wife Savers podcast. And one of our most popular episodes is about the mother-in-law relationship. I was in a public place recently and was stopped by someone who said, that episode changed my life.
Oh my God, that's great.
We all have relationships like that. So, but spending, we don't have to spend all our time with our mother-in-law. So I like the idea of being really careful about who we spend how much time, the amount of time, how much to do with that.
Can I share, though, something really, really powerful that I happen to have been talking about for years, but I heard echoed throughout all of the interviews? I hope will be really practical and helpful in just what you're describing, Ramona. So part of self-care is also questioning your thinking. Because all thinking is just stories that we tell ourselves all day long. So take mother-in-law, poor mum-in-law is getting a bit of a hard time. But we start to tell ourselves stories about our mother-in-law and what she's like. And those are stories we have made up based on experiences that we've had. But remember, when we have an experience, we only take in about 10% of the available information. So our recollection or the accuracy with which we experience something is not reliable. I mean, it is inaccurate. I mean, it's 90% inaccurate. So these stories that we tell ourselves have a really, really unstable foundation. Plus, we have in our brain a negativity bias. So I was talking about this continuum. And because we've been evolutionarily hardwired to look for risks in our environment. When mum-in-law comes in, we are waiting, because we've already got a negative story, we are waiting for her to behave in that way we expect her to behave. Now, because we only pick up 10% of the information in our environment, we will pick up that bad behavior or that tone of voice or the implicit criticism or whatever it may be, because of our negativity bias and the fact our story has already been set up that way. But remember, this is a continuum, and I call it my compassion continuum. And because we are thinking human beings, we can shift the story from, or shift our attention from that end of the spectrum or the continuum right up to the compassionate end, because more than one story can be true at the same time. What I mean by that is we can think of our mother-in-law and think of the things that we respect, admire, or at least feel compassionate about. So she may be really caring, or she may have been really thoughtful with us on a few occasions, or she might have had a really tough time, or she might have lost her husband, whatever. Just make up a story which has its foundation in your experience, but make up a story which is the most compassionate, kindest, most positive story you can. And whenever you're about to come into that space with your mother-in-law, you're going to see her or have coffee with her, or she's going to come round to the house, do not let your brain go down to the negative story, but deliberately dial it up, the compassion continuum, to the best, most positive story, and fix that, feel it, and then you will notice different things because your lens is fixed in a different space. But also your 90%, remember what I said about your thinking being aligned with how you're behaving, everything then is aligned. So you don't have to worry about leaking, because all you're leaking is sweet leaking. You know, it's compassionate leaking, it's positive leaking. You don't have to worry about the volume switch and so on.
And she or whoever it is feels that. They feel it, and they respond to it. And it's just really hard not to be on the defensive when you feel like someone has hurt you particularly, and maybe, or disappointed you repeatedly. But I love this idea of compassion continuum. I've always taught my children to judge hopefully of people.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And so, like, when we're on the freeway and the, you know, we get this, it looks like, you know, a young man driver with the young woman behind him, and they're just like, and they cut us off, and they, you know, and everything. And my husband's, and I go, honey, she might be having a baby. They're on their way to the hospital. We don't know.
Yeah.
And that's just a different story. I choose my.
It's a different story. Our brain will make up a story. You might as well choose one that's the most positive story that you can choose, because it empowers you. It makes you feel better. And as you say, the other person can feel it. And then you get into this lovely virtuous exchange where they can feel a better sense from you, and therefore they'll give better behavior back and things get better. So if you can't discount them from one of the 5 people you spend most of your time with, then really focus on changing the story to one which is as positive as you possibly can.
Wow. And you know, all these things you're teaching us carry so much more weight because that they've been taught you, they've been revealed to you by people who really earn the right to talk about these things.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to kind of morph or shift a little bit in still focusing on relationships. But why take the mother-in-law again, or any situation, any less than comfortable, let's put it, relationship in your life? Why does it matter so much to us what that person thinks or what anybody thinks if we're into the self-acceptance and we're doing the self-care, but still kind of we may be reacting, maybe leaning towards that negative 10% story because we care so much about what other people are thinking about it. Where does this fall into? How does that combine with self-acceptance and caring? We still want to care. We do care what they think. How does that work?
Okay. So here's what the thrivers have shared with me, and here's how I have seen it map out through the first book that I wrote about this in my first book, and it's been really validated by what I heard from the thrivers. So the fundamental truth is that no one can make us feel about ourselves something that we don't already feel about ourselves. So let me say that again. No one can make us feel about ourselves something we don't already believe to be true about ourselves.
Wow.
So
that is huge. That's so profound.
It's profound and so true. And I do a lot of work in my coaching practice on these core beliefs, because core beliefs, like my core belief used to be, I have to be perfect to be lovable. Now, newsflash, no one is perfect. So really what my core belief was, I am not lovable. So that was the lens through which I saw the world. And this little thing in the base of my skull called my reticular activating system was like a policeman on high alert, looking in my outside environment for evidence that I was not perfect. Guess where it got that evidence from primarily? From other people and their opinion of me. So when I would absolutely hone in on people who looked like they weren't approving of me or what I was doing, and that would be validation for my core belief that I had to be perfect, and I wasn't perfect, therefore I was unlovable. But even when someone said to me, "You've done a great job, Emma," I couldn't take that in. I would go, well, they don't know me. They don't really know me, or they're just saying that. So I would discount what they were saying in order to sit with the story I was telling myself about myself. So why are we so attached to the approval from others? Because our core belief prevents us from approving of ourselves. Once you get your core belief replaced, because it's just something that was put in there around our 5th, 6th, or 7th birthday, and then reinforced mainly by ourselves in the way that we experience our environment. Once you replace it with a core belief, which is true for who you now are, and I chose to replace it with a core belief, which is I'm okay just as I am. But it doesn't sound like rock and roll, but for me it was life-changing. I am okay just as I am. Now imagine that. You're telling your brain that. Now your brain, if this is a brain, your brain is neuroplastic, so it's got these neural pathways. And the old core belief, I need to be perfect to be lovable, would light up whenever I was dealing with any kind of implicit criticism in my external environment. I changed the shape of my brain by creating a new neural pathway, which was I'm okay just as I am. And I did it by believing it with absolute passion, getting my neurons firing together and wiring together. So imagine my little reticular activity system that's going around with the story, I'm okay just as I am. When someone disapproves of me, that's okay because they're entitled to their opinion. But I know I'm okay just as I am. I'm absolutely not perfect and I still have a lot to learn. And so if someone says to me, I don't think you did that very well, or what you said wasn't okay, I'm going to be much more open to listening to that because I know I'm okay and I've still got some growing to do. So let me hear it. Mm. But it doesn't cut me deep like it used to. You know, I know I can take on board someone's opinion, and whether I do will depend on whether I know that they care about me or they have my best interest at heart, or maybe what I've done is triggered their insecurity. So it's not really their opinion of me, but rather their projection of how I make them feel and so on. So it all comes down to our core belief conditioning that started when we were around 5, 6, 7 years old.
Wow. That long ago.
That long ago, you know,
it's like been suffering for a long time.
Exactly.
We had the power, you know, I use that in my book, The Wizard of Oz, you know, when Dorothy finds out at the end that she was wearing the shoes, she could have gone home anytime. She had the power all along. It's all in there. We could actually, as you put it, reshape our brain by purposely focusing on a different affirmation. I'm okay just as I am. Wow.
And I've worked with hundreds of people who've done it, Ramona, hundreds and hundreds of people and I use the analogy of the tree. So the core belief is the root ball of the tree. Now, if the core belief is not healthy, guess what happens to the trunk? It's not healthy. The trunk are your neural pathways. And then the branches are your thoughts and the leaves are your feelings. Everything is contaminated by the health or otherwise of the root ball. But you can replace the root ball. And I mean, I'm very happy to give anyone here a free PDF download of the book because it goes through the steps to follow to do that. But it is the most, well, you wrote the foreword for the book. So, I love it. That's how much you love it. But that fundamentally is why we are so tuned into looking out for other people's approval to make us feel okay about ourselves. And if we fix that one thing.
Rotting. Yeah. Wow. Okay. You used a word in there that I want to ask you about what your take on this. And that's the word happy. You said we're happy or not happy. What is happy? Is it so important? Really? What is it? What did you learn from your thrivers about that? How did they, having gone through such horrendous situations, feel like they can never be happy again? And are they really?
Well, I learned a lot about happiness from our thrivers. A lot about happiness. Now, we all know the emotion of happiness, but what is it really? And I think Tina Mcguff is the thriver who really helped me see something that I hadn't seen before. So Tina was living with her brother and sister, living with her two sisters and her mum and dad, and literally in the middle of the night one night, she's woken from her sleep. And she's 13 at that time, and she's the oldest sister, so it's a neighbour waking her from her sleep. She has to go downstairs, and her life has changed in one moment. Her mum's been taken into prison. Her dad's been taken to hospital. There's been a violent encounter between the two of them. And long story short, her mum gets out of prison, but they don't see their dad so much anymore. They lose the house, and they end up living in supported accommodation, washing their hair with cold water, not having enough money for the electricity meter, and just losing all of the joy and happiness in their life. And Tina wrote a wonderful book called Seconds to Snap, where she talks about the moment when she felt her brain snap. She had a friend whose parents offered to take her to Italy in the middle of all of this. Of course, her mum didn't have the money to buy her summer clothes, so her friend's parents bought her a few things, and she's on this beach in Italy, with a towel around her, trying to protect her modesty and change into her swimsuit. And she thought she heard someone tell her she had a fat bum, a fat backside, and everything changed in that moment. Because she came home a completely different person. She became consumed with counting the calories of everything, of doing repetitive exercises, of weighing herself, and she just fell into the depths of anorexia. And she was hospitalized several times. On several occasions, she was very near death. And I mean, one of the things that really turned things around for her, but it wasn't dramatic. She describes it as being like a grain of sand in the middle of a desert. And she said she was lying in hospital and she was being treated and they were trying to get her to gain weight. And she got used to the footsteps of the nurses on the ward, and she was just lying, and she heard footsteps she didn't recognize. So she looked up from her hospital bed and she saw in the distance her dad. And her dad was having issues with a nurse. He was trying to get past the nurse to see Tina, but Tina wasn't allowed visitors because she was in too precarious a condition. And then her dad saw her. And she just said, his face washed through with shock, disgust, horror, because he didn't recognize her. And she said in that moment, she realized she was loved. She suddenly remembered, was the way she put it. She remembered that her dad loved her and her mum loved her and her sisters loved her. And she had to get back to being the person she used to be. Now I don't want people to think that meant it was an easy journey for her, because it absolutely wasn't. But she eventually recovered from the disease. And she does a lot of great work now talking about it. And I got onto this topic because you asked me, what is happiness? And even though she had recovered, and even though she had a family, she still was in this place of having to control everything. So she'd get up at 5 a.m., she'd get the kids up, she'd make their bed, she'd clean the house, she'd do the packed lunch. She'd get, she wanted everything to be perfect. But she thought she was happy, but she was happy still living according to the rules that society required her, or she thought society required her. So she needed to be the perfect mum, the perfect wife, the perfect friend. She was still trying to live up to this idea of perfection, because perfection would bring approval and approval would make her happy. And she was watching, of all things, a Haagen-Dazs ice cream advert. I don't know if you've got Haagen-Dazs in the US.
Yes,
it's like a really upmarket Ben and Jerry's. Sorry, Ben and Jerry's.
You can only afford a little thing of it.
Yeah, it's kind of upmarket. And she realized she was still controlling what she ate, and she just thought, I want ice cream. So she went out and she bought a big tub of ice cream and she sat down, she ate it all. And that made her really, really happy.
Oh.
And then she started to become much more conscious of, well, never mind what everyone tells me should make me happy. Actually, what does make me happy? What does make me happy? And so what are my values? I always think values are the starting point to what make you happy. So,
that's helpful, because I have a lot of women who will say, because we talk a lot about in Wife Savers about how to make ourselves, what makes me happy, really. That's the way to put it.
Yeah.
And lots of women don't know.
Yeah.
They've been so other focused for so long, they don't even really know what makes them happy. So she had to do that. So you're saying, if that's how you feel, you start with, what do I value?
You start with what? So it's almost like when you throw a stone into a pond and the ripples come out. The center of those ripples lie your values. So what do you really value? And do an exercise, like there's one in my first book that I can give away for nothing, where you've got a list of words, a list of values. And you just go through that list and you do it 3 or 4 times until you narrow it right down to a core set of 5 words that you think, yeah, that's it, that's what I value. So, for example, my core values include making a contribution, so making a difference, but they also include freedom and flexibility and love, of course.
Those are good ones.
Yeah, and fun, actually having fun. So that lies at the center. So I ask myself, what can I do that makes me feel free? So one of the things I do that gives me a massive sense of freedom is running along the beach. Now that just gives me so much freedom. It gives us, and it makes me incredibly happy. So what can you do, or who can you be with that fulfill your values? So if love is a core value, then really thinking about, what loving thing can I do for someone else? Because I think with love, for me, it's about what loving thing can I do for someone else? That might be going up to my husband and telling him the 5 things that I'm so grateful for that he's done for me in this past week. Or it might be saying that today I'm going to live according to the value of love. And so everyone I meet, I'm going to give them a genuine compliment or extend genuine appreciation. So that is what happiness is. It's living, consciously living, deliberately living out your values as often as you can. That's what it means for me. And Tina, that's what it means for Tina. That's what it means for Emma Slade, the Buddhist nun who we interviewed, who I may tell you about. She was really clear that that's what happiness is.
Wow. All right. So happiness is living congruent, basically, with your values. in alignment with
And,
values as much as possible.
yeah, so congruency, yes, every decision you make, the way you behave and so on. But actually, I would say it's more than that. It's sitting down and planning. Planning to do things for yourself that will bring your values to life for you, that will make you feel, give you a sensation that are your values coming to life.
Okay. Living out your values, bringing them from in here to out here. And then what happens? You find the joy that comes right back in here. Wow, that's amazing. So the big enemy to all of this, it sounds like I'm hearing over and over, especially the story of your thriver who battled her anorexia and so forth. And even after that was, she's back on a healthy, more normal path, still she's haunted by, she didn't even realize she was, by this idea of perfection. So that's the real enemy, isn't it? How do we find our authentic self as opposed to this shell of a thing that, this sketch in our minds that we never really are happy because we can't really attain it because it doesn't really represent our real values? Does it go back to values, the idea of authenticity?
Yeah, that's what we were hearing from the thrivers, that it's really this combination of the two things I'm talking about. It's this combination of having an empowering core belief. So for me, knowing I'm okay as I am. For other people, it might be knowing they're good enough, knowing they're worthy. But it's this sense of my judgment counts. That I am whole as I am.
Okay.
And therefore, it's that, and then really being clear on what your values are, and all perfectionism is wearing a mask. It's wearing a mask that you think other people want to see.
Oh, now we're back to caring so much about what other people think. Okay.
But that's all perfectionism is. It's either perfectionism, this tendency to want to be perfect comes again from, I need you to think I'm okay because I don't think I'm okay. That's all perfectionism is projecting a mask that you think will get you approval from other people. Doing what you think you have to do in order to get that approval. But your own happiness is more important than fitting in.
Well, it's interesting. Even if I could achieve perfection, like today I'm going to live perfectly, everyone's going to approve of me, I'm going to approve of me, it's going to be a perfect day, a perfect me. At the end of the day, I probably wouldn't even really be happy.
No, you wouldn't, because this idea of perfection it's not you, it's not your values. And it's actually not really what everyone else wants either. It's an elusive fiction. It's a made-up state. It does not exist. It's like the Wizard of Oz. It is not real. It's completely made up in our head. So I've never had a perfect day. I've had a day that's made me really happy, and that for me couldn't have been more perfect. But it wasn't. But that's a subjective idea of perfection. This subjective idea of perfection doesn't exist because you cannot please all the people all the time.
Right.
So these two things together, getting your core beliefs into a really healthy state, combined with deliberately living out your values, that's authenticity. And then using your skills and your experience and what motivates you intrinsically rather than extrinsically. So let me take a moment to explain that, because that sounds like gobbledygook. But research defines extrinsic motivators as the things that get us approval from others. So things like success, status, position, money, houses, cars, all of that stuff. And then you've got intrinsic motivators, which are the things which make us happy, so that we approve of internally. So things like wanting to make a difference in the lives of others, things like living a healthful life, things like giving and receiving love, all of these things. So what research says is that when we try and attract or achieve the extrinsic stuff, we tend to be more anxious. We suffer from depression a lot more. But when we focus on the intrinsic stuff, and that's knowing what our values are, having healthy core beliefs, and being really clear about, when we feel good about ourselves, what are we doing? Usually spending time with the family, being out in nature, maybe doing spiritual things, maybe demonstrating our faith in some way. That's all intrinsic stuff. And people who are driven by authentic, intrinsic motivators, they're much less likely to suffer from anxiety and depression, and they are more consistently happy. To put it another way, they are thriving. And so when I spoke to all these thrivers, I was hearing the same thing time and again. What had become really important to them was all the intrinsic stuff. What had become not important at all in any way, shape, or form was the extrinsic stuff.
Wow. So this is blowing my mind. So we have, in the sense that you're talking about it now, not putting so much energy and value into or care about extrinsic as more on what's going on intrinsically with us. But at the same time, we just talked about how important it is to actually live out our values, taking what is deep in here and making the actions and the choices of our lives manifest those values, and so that will bring us joy. So it's this constant flow between what's happening out here with what's happening in here. If I tell myself I'm okay just the way I am, and that means I just sit on the couch all day, I don't have to do anything, I'm just going to sit here because I'm okay right here, just exactly how I am, that will not bring me any kind of happiness either. I have to be living out my core values and making sure that root system is healthy and watered, and all that does take effort. But it's also being open. I love this idea of the love, breathing in the love, because when I do that too, what I feel is my chest opening up. I feel myself opening up to the world instead of this. That's one of my tests. If I feel literally my body start to cave in, I know I'm on the defensive. I'm thinking down I'm going down that negative road. My compassion continuum is, I'm forgetting myself. I'm going in like this. But when I do that, what a beautiful thing. That balance, I naturally want to open up again to the world and be open to the idea of growing right along with the imperfection and because of the imperfection, right?
Absolutely. And it sounds like there's an awful lot to remember. I love the way you put it all. And if there was just one thing you want to remember, that is just change the story. Because when you're like this, it's because you're telling yourself a story that's not empowering. Stop and tell yourself a different story. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think my poster boy in this project for that was Joseph Ubelkas. So Joseph was 23, 24. He was an IT consultant. He's Dutch. He was born to a Moroccan father. He also spoke French. He was bilingual. And he went off to Morocco with his fledgling business to work for a Dutch company who had lots of offices out there. And one day he turns up at one of the offices at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there are custom vans and custom officers, I should say, all over the car park. And he asks them what's happening, and they swing open the doors of this van, and what he sees are just drugs stacked high in this van. And he's saying, oh my God, what's happened? And before he knows where he is, he's in a police cell. He is told it's okay. I mean, this was on the 23rd of December. He said, you'll be home for Christmas. You'll be back in the Netherlands for Christmas. Christmas came and went. He was not back in the Netherlands. He was called into court. The whole court hearing was conducted in Arabic. He had no idea what was going on. And then he was convicted to 10 years in the Moroccan jail. and horrific for something he didn't do. And then at the appeal stage, even though he'd proved that the judge had been wrong for the grounds that he'd been convicted of, the appeal judge agreed the judge had been wrong and still sentenced him to 10 years in the Moroccan jail. Now, I don't know if anyone watching has seen programs on Moroccan jails, but they're called sardine tins because the prisoners have to lie head to toe on the floor at night among the feces and the excrement and, you know, the rats and the cockroaches. It's horrific. Joseph said to me that at the appeal hearing, when he realised what was going on, he decided in that moment that they could lock his body up, that they were not going to take his freedom of mind. And that will stay with me for as long as I live, because if he can choose his response in a situation like that, you can bet I can choose whatever story I tell myself in any situation I face every day. That really stays with me. And to wrap up what we've been saying about self-care, his mother wrote him 400 letters while he was in jail. He ended up being in jail for a total of 4.5 years. But he really exemplified what we've been talking about here. He looked at what his values were. He had this determination that he was going to be okay in that environment. And so he lived out his values. So one of his core values was health and self-care. And so he brushed his teeth every single day and very carefully. His mum sent him bottles of water. He was also a very connective person, and he wanted to make a difference in the lives of others. So he learned Arabic. He befriended other prisoners. He set up a prison garden. He set up a Keep Fit club in the prison. He started to teach English to the prisoners. You know, and it's this. That's what happiness is. It's looking at your values. One of his was, I need to make a difference here, and living those out in whatever environment you find yourself. And even when he was released 4.5 years later, part of him didn't want to leave because he had made a life for himself. He had found a kind of happiness there that I can't imagine. So if it's possible there, then it must be possible for all of us in our lives when we've got the freedom to make lots of different kinds of choices.
All right. You've taken my breath away. I'm sure you have. Everybody's given us so much to think about. And there's so much more we can talk about. We've been talking, though, for an hour and a half. And
oh, my goodness, so I have.
Sorry. So we probably should wrap up. But yeah. I'm excited that you have something to give everybody today. Tell us more about that.
So one of the things that I am really passionate about is relationships. It's how we can bring our best self to every time we connect with someone. And I wanted to bring a lot of what we've spoken about together so that everyone here can thrive in every single relationship in their life. And what I've done is created a series of 9 video webinars, so just me talking to recorded webinar that goes through in real detail all of the practical things I've learned from the thrivers about how we can create relationships that thrive. And even if we're in a relationship that's just surviving, what we can do without even telling the other person, what we can do to shift that relationship from surviving to thriving. And I know you're passionate about this, Ramona. You talk to your wives about this. I mean, it's so critical. So what I'd love to do is give everyone a copy of all of those 9 videos. And I know, Emily, that you have the link for that, which is fantastic. I'm also conscious that I've talked a bit about my first book, and at the moment, and it won't last very long because I'm about to take this option down from my website, but if people go on to emmajbell.com, that's emmajbell.com, at the moment they'll get a free PDF download of my book, but that's going to be coming down in the next week or 2.
Oh, good. So move on that.
Yeah, move on that.
Really got to get this book. You heard me mention it earlier, how much I love it. I teach I have a whole program and course and membership called the Wife Savers Education Membership, and we learn all about ourselves, and everything we've talked about today falls right in line with everything Wife Savers. And then you just mentioned the relationships aspect. So we become masters, if you will, of building relationships, especially the one we have with our husband through the things we've learned. So everything you've taught us today, though, has either validated what we were learning as Wife Savers or amplified and deepened. And your book does that. So if you are as excited about the Wife Savers principles, everybody here today, that as I am, obviously, I think you're going to really want Emma's stuff, because it just going to add more oomph and depth. I see that Emily has put the link there for Emma's free gift in the chat box. So
Thank you, Emily.
But we will also send it to you in a follow-up email today. So you can go get it right now if you want. Do you see Emma's? Did she get the right address? emmajbell.com. Okay.
Good.
Rachel,
Well done, Emily.
Rachel's one of my, front row students. I call her.
Well done, Rachel.
So yeah, grab that stuff. All right. Let's take a few minutes then to maybe answer some questions. If anyone needs to go, you won't hurt our feelings if you need to take care of other things, but we will take some live questions right now. But I also think we had some submitted. Emily, is that right? Why don't you come on camera now? I'm also going to bring Deb on. She's another member of our Wife Savers team, and she can help monitor what's going on in the chat box if I make her a panelist. Is she made a panelist already? No. Okay, well, go ahead. Has someone given us a question that maybe Emma can answer?
Yes, we had several questions submitted prior to the webinar. I think everyone has been so profoundly touched by all you've had to say that no one has asked me questions during the webinar. I know I was busy taking pages of notes, so probably everyone else was the same. But we did have a few questions submitted prior to the webinar, so they may incorporate some things you've already touched on, but I'll just give you a few things. This one is, how do I stop feeling guilty about self-care? And how do I learn to prioritize myself, without that guilt?
Okay, so if the person was here, I hope they're on somewhere. Thanks for the question. It's a great question. I think it's one that will resonate with lots of people. I rather bluntly say that guilt is a choice, that we are conditioned to feel guilty. It comes from the way we see ourselves, our sense of not being deserving, so our core belief. So I would say, do the core belief work, because if you feel guilty for looking after yourself, your core belief will be something like, I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. So you need to do the core belief work that we've been talking about. You also need to get out of the habit of feeling guilty, unless there genuinely is something to feel guilty about. So guilt is a very useful emotion. When we feel it, we can examine it and look and say, okay, why do I feel guilty? Have I done something to offend someone? Is it true that I should be placing my attention on something else right now? Or do I have time and space to do this thing for myself? So it's useful, but it's also a habit. We get into the habit of feeling guilty. And so we really replace that habit of feeling guilty with a habit of stopping, looking at the emotion, looking at the cause of it, and then making a different choice, which is to do that thing for ourselves. But a lot of the time I notice from working with coaching clients that guilt is a habitual reaction that comes from how they really see themselves, the core belief work that we were talking about earlier on.
I find myself saying, I feel guilty that I'm not doing this thing for somebody else, but instead I'm doing something for me. And I realize that when I say that to myself, and sometimes even out loud, I feel guilty. What I actually am saying is, I'm concerned about that person. I'm concerned that they might need me in this moment. Mm-hmm. And then I have to say, do they? No, actually, they don't need me right this moment. It just kind of clarifies for me. It isn't really a matter of guilt. I feel guilty. It's like, I really love that person. I'm concerned about them. Do they need me? Actually, they don't. They could do just fine without me in this moment. I'm going to do me. So I matter is so powerful. I'm going to use that in my own life. I'm going to teach it to other women, and I will always give you credit. I just love that idea. I matter. That core.
Well, give the thrivers credit, and because that came through again and again. I love what you've just said, Ramona, and it just reminds me of another thing that I do. If I think, oh, I feel guilty about that, I stop and imagine one of my best friends. Like, I see my best friend Claire Moore is on, so she's in the chat room. So I'll imagine, what would Claire say to me? If I said to Claire, I feel guilty about doing this, what would she say to me? I trust her judgment. Mm-hmm. I think she's got a balanced perspective. And if she would say, Emma, there's no need to feel guilty, go do it, then that's a really good way of getting out of the habit and being more objective. So what would your best friend say?
Oh, that's such a good idea. Now you're making me think of many, many instances where a best friend did that for me, where I'm like, oh, I shouldn't go on that trip with my husband. I'll have to leave my kids. And she'd say, Ramona, it took that sort of other voice. So that's a best friend. I'm telling you. I did that for Emily just yesterday, didn't I, Emily?
Yay.
You did. You gave me permission and inspiration. You gave me
what you did.
I think I've been in a place of depletion for a little while, and it's been brought to my attention loudly from various sources recently that I needed to do something for myself. And so there was a movie I wanted to go see, and I've mentioned to my husband several times I wanted to go see it, and used my Lifesaver skills to ask him in a way that meant I would like to go see this and I would need your help with the kids so I can do it. Well, I happened to have a meeting with Ramona yesterday, and she was telling me about her upcoming trip to New York. And I thought, if Ramona can go to New York and go to a Broadway play for herself, I can surely go to a movie for 2 hours. So I called my husband and I just said, hey, when can we work it out for me to see that movie? And he said, what are you doing today? My schedule's quiet. I'll come home and take our boy and be there when the kids get home from school, and you go see your movie. And I did. I went and saw my movie, and then the kids came home and I was with everyone for a while. And then I said, you know what? Would you take the kids skating? We were going to take the kids roller skating. I said, would you take them? I'd like to just go for a walk and be here myself. And I did. So I gave myself hours yesterday. And I said to myself, because of Ramona, I said to myself on the way to the movie, I am doing this for me because I have a relationship with me and I'm important too. And I need this for me. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah. She sent me a little text like from the movie. I'm actually here.
I love it. I love it.
Example for that very recent living example. You're getting lots of high fives and loves and wahoos from everybody. And that's what
you can all do it too. You can all do it too. I give you permission. Send me your selfie.
Oh, that is just absolutely priceless. Okay, do we have another question? We can take maybe a couple more.
Yes. So this kind of piggybacks on what we just said, and maybe get both of your takes on this. How do I balance my need for self-care with my husband's needs? And I might even add with my children's needs. Once we've kind of set our mindset, Emma, and we realize we're worth it, how do we make those daily decisions of right now it's me or it's him or it's them? How do we juggle all of that?
So Ramona, my tuppence worth is you talk about it. It becomes one of those really healthy discussion areas, and your children, it's great role modeling for your kids because you're all saying, okay, we all matter. So how do we negotiate a way of doing stuff that's fun for us all so that we all matter equally? I think that's brilliant role modeling for kids. And it's just a really healthy way. You bring it into part of the everyday discussion or the every week discussion.
Absolutely. So there's that. There's the being intentional and proactive, and that we're going to have actually some out loud communication about it, and everybody gets their opportunity. There's modeling it yourself. So if they see mom acting as though she matters and expecting and asking for what, help with what she needs, I think that's really powerful, especially for our daughters to learn and to see us do, and also observe how we interact with their dad in expressing those needs. And then they're also going to be observing us on how we meet his needs. Mm-hmm. Are we aware of his needs? Here's the beautiful thing, Emma, we all know this. When we're living like we matter, like you say, and from those core values, we want to take care of others. You mentioned the word resentment early on. The resentment is, and what is replaced is a genuine love, much, much more love than you ever had before, an abundance of love, that then you really do want to meet everyone else's needs, not everyone else's, but those 5 people, the people that you're really spending, that you really, really care and have so much interaction with each day. You want to see them happy. You want to do what you can to facilitate. But that's an expression of your core, one of your core, even your central core value. And so it brings fulfillment and satisfaction and happiness. But if you're not in touch with all of that because you've been depleted, like Emily talked about, and you're just acting out of my have-tos and I should haves and what they expect from me and, what are they thinking and all that other stuff that really messes with that root bowl that you talked about.
Yeah,
so,
I agree completely with you.
So I matter, and living like I matter, our families are going to observe us, our children are going to observe us, and they will, as they grow, it will be much more possible for them to live that way as well. And then if we teach them, like your thriver that you brought the children around her every day, and they actually talk through these things, and they learn to articulate them. That's the other thing that we don't learn. So many of us don't learn is how to really identify what we need and articulate it. So help them practice that as a child too. And a husband, your husband has to learn to do that too. What do you need? Yeah. Wow. I have this vision of these amazing families that are being created by our wife savers, our smart mommies. All right. Does that answer that question, do you think? All right. Do you have another one? Maybe one more?
Yes, I have quickly just a technical question. We have one of our listeners who has gone to your website already to sign up for the free copy of your book and said she's waiting for that. Does she just wait for that to come in her email, or what will happen? Okay.
A PDF will arrive in her inbox with a lovely Technicolor copy of my book.
Okay. Wonderful. She was just wondering. Okay. And
can I say, Emily, if with anyone, if there's any technical glitch anywhere, then please feel free to drop me an email, either through my website, the contact section of my website, or it's just emma@emmajbell.com. But it should all work perfectly.
Okay, wonderful. So our listener can hopefully just wait for that download to show up soon and contact you if there's any problems. Okay, great. This friend asks, well, we talked about self-care. I think this also relates to self-care. How do you make your alone time count when it's limited and you're both tired? And I think that she's talking about prioritizing the marriage, right? But I guess living according to your values, staying true to your marriage. How do you fit that in when you've dealt with kids and life all day, if you've both worked or whatever your situation is and you're tired, you want to give some time to yourself and each other. Again, it's back to that balance, but just any other thoughts from that perspective also?
So my initial thought is it depends what your priority is. So when I hear that question, Emily, I interpret it as meaning, do I use the time for husband and I to have quality time together when we're so time starved, or do I use it to prioritize myself? And if you and husband haven't had quality time together, then I would say that's a priority, because I do think that you can fill yourself up by having quality time with the person that you love, and you fill them up too. Because I do think that when the relationship needs some intimacy and connection, which comes from spending quality time together, whether it's going to the movies or having dinner or just putting the TV off and spending an hour over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine talking, then if you're both completely engaged in that, that's a wonderful way of caring for yourself, of filling up with love, filling the relationship up with love. And like when you throw the stone in the water, the ripple effect of that continues. So, what's the priority? And if your relationship hasn't had time and attention, then I think you can care for yourself by engaging fully in a loving space with your husband, as long as he is in the right frame of mind to engage fully in that space with you. If he isn't, that's okay too. Go and talk to him about how you're going to use that time instead. Ramona, what do you think?
That is so wonderful, because when we're talking about, I need to have more time, we're thinking more like Emily's example, which is very, very valid. I'm going to go to the movies by myself, or I'm going to have time for myself. This is a young mother talking, right? Or maybe you're busy, in a corporate setting, for instance, and, just being bombarded by people and questions and needs all the time. And I just need time alone. But that doesn't necessarily, self-care doesn't necessarily mean being all alone. Could be wanting to go to a festival and being around a lot of other people who are having fun, right? Or it could be having one-on-one time with a child, or especially a primary relationship with your husband, and it just fills you back, fills you up. That is so true for me. So true for me. My time with my husband is my number one best possible nirvana ideal of what we call delights in Wife Savers. And it's all about that self-care. What a good point. Isn't that a good point, Emily? Yeah, I love that. All right. I'm trying to wrap this up right at the top of the hour, so maybe we have time for one more. Are there any others, Emily? Should we open it up? Did we have anyone submit a question during the webinar, or were they all just so absorbed they didn't think about it? Is that right? We can take one live question if someone wants to, or if Emily, we have another one that's been submitted that's appropriate to the occasion.
Yeah, there was only one other that particularly applied, I think, to the content today. And it was just about what does it mean to live authentically and to love your family in this way. And I think you've covered that beautifully, Emma. But if you have any other thoughts to share, feel free to share them now. And if anyone wants to submit a live question, they can. But any final thoughts on that?
So in my role as a judge, when I ask if there are any other comments that anyone has to make, and they go ahead and repeat what they've already said, it drives me nuts. Nothing to add.
Yeah, that summarizes a lot of the news that we see on TV today. Everybody commenting on everybody else's comments. Oh, that's so precious. All right. Well, then we will go ahead and wrap up today. I would be very remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to invite any of you who are attending today or listening that are not part yet of my Wife Savers Education membership to really consider that. If you enjoy this kind of environment, this kind of enlightenment, this kind of support, this kind of joy, this kind of insight, all of that, that's what we're all about at Wife Savers. And what it really is a systematic approach to achieving the kind of things that we're talking about. And as I say, if you will combine those principles and all the life support and love that we give you with the things that Emma is teaching us and talking about and her free gifts that are going to be so valuable to you, it will only enrich your life. Isn't it wonderful that we have this modern technology, that we can be together like this as women, talk about these beautiful things, like I said at the very beginning, that we have the opportunity to create the life that we love, that is authentic to us, not perfect, just authentic, that we have the opportunity to actually love our marriage and love our relationships and to follow our dreams because they matter, because I matter. Right? But I'm just going to be on a high today. And you know what I'm going to do for the rest of the day? I'm going to go to my hometown where I grew up, and I'm going to have dinner with my friends who've been my friends since I was in kindergarten. That's what I'm going to do for Ramona today. Emma, it's the end of your day. What are you going to do for you today?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is put some lights on because it's just been gradually getting darker and darker, and didn't want to leave because my light switch is like over there. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is make sure that all you lovely people have a copy of the book, because I can see there's one or two people in chat saying they're still waiting on the PDF. Please do not worry. I'm getting notifications through that you've signed up. You will get it. So I'm going to take care of that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a walk by the seashore with my wonderful husband and my little dog buddy. That's what I'm going to do for myself.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!
Before the light goes completely.
You eventually. I am going to get there sooner or later.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much for sharing so much.
Thank you.
Hard-won experience that you did all that you did in. I can't even imagine the logistics and the resources that were put into that magnificent undertaking for our benefit. And I know it was for yours too, but we're so, so blessed. Thank you very, very much. Emily, thank you for your help today. Deb, thank you for your help on the back end too. And we will see you all again soon. If you're a member of the Wife Savers Premium membership, we have our kitchen table conversations and our live labs coming up very soon. We'll get to all the questions that maybe we didn't get to today, but we hope that you'll think about that premium membership so you can do this more often. And the premium members will also have access to a replay of this webinar. All right. Love you all. Have a beautiful day. Love yourself today. You matter. Bye-bye. See ya.
Bye-bye.